My name is Lena Sewell, and I'm 34 years old. 3 weeks before my sister's wedding, my mom called me while I was washing dishes and asked me to leave my service dog at home. Not the wedding, just the dog. She had a reason ready, and then a second reason, and then a third one. And when none of them stuck, she stopped being reasonable and said the thing she actually meant. He makes it about you. I stood there with my hands in the water and I didn't argue. I came anyway. What happened at that reception is the reason I don't ask anybody's permission for anything now, and it's the reason my family Thanksgiving has an empty chair in it. But that phone call was the polite part. Welcome back to Wise Family Revenge. This is where we sit with long stories about ordinary families, the quiet decisions, the ones nobody films, the ones that end up changing a whole line of people. If you have ever been asked to make yourself smaller so a room could stay comfortable, you're in the right place. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. Because the part that still keeps me up isn't the phone call, and it isn't the reception. It's the fact that I did everything right that week. Every single step. I made the calls, I sent the emails, I got there 90 minutes early. And it didn't matter at all. Duke is a 78-pound yellow Labrador and he is not a pet. I want that clear before anything else happens in this story. He came to me in March of 2023 from a program called Second Watch K9, after 19 months on a waitlist and 3 weeks of team training that ran 240 hours. He does 3 things. He stands behind me in crowds so nobody can come up on my back. He puts his full weight across my feet when I lose the thread, and he holds it there until I come back. And when I tell him out, he finds the nearest door and takes me to it. That's the whole list. He doesn't sense my feelings, he doesn't read my mind, and he does not do tricks. His vest says, Second Watch K9, working dog, do not pet, in white letters on navy, and people read it about half the time. I work as an LPN doing wound care in patients' homes, 11 a week across 3 counties, mostly diabetic feet and post-surgical drains. Duke lies in the hallway outside the room. He has never once come in. On a Tuesday in Kerrville, I'll spend 40 minutes with a man named Buddy, who is 81 and stubborn about his socks, and Duke will lie on the linoleum by the door with his chin on his paws, and Buddy will say the same joke about the dog getting paid more than me, and I'll laugh the same amount every time. That's my life. It is a good life, and I built it out of parts. Here's the thing I didn't understand until that fall. In 3.5 years, not one person in my family had ever asked me what Duke actually does. Not my mom, not my aunts, not my cousins. They had opinions about him. They just didn't have questions. The call came on September 26th, a little after 7 at night. I had chicken grease on my forearms and the radio on low. My mom, Sharon, opens every phone call the same way, with 3 minutes of scheduling. Flowers were a problem. The florist wanted to swap the garden roses for something called a spray rose and Cass didn't care, and that made it worse, because my mother needs somebody to care so she has something to solve. I said the spray roses sounded fine. I dried my hands. Then she did the thing she does, which is to lower her voice half a step. Like the next sentence is a favor she's doing me. There's one little thing, she said. I waited. About Saturday, the dog. Not Duke. The dog. She had reasons lined up like place settings. Trent's mother has allergies, she said, which turned out to mean Trent's mother once mentioned a cat in 1998. Then it was the rented flooring, and whether a dog's nails would mark it, and whether the deposit covered that. Then it was the photographs. You know how pictures are, she said. Forever. I asked her which one it was. She said all of them, which is how I knew it was none of them. So I asked the only question worth asking. Is this you asking, or is this Cass? There was a pause on the line, and in that pause I could hear my mother's refrigerator humming, and I could hear her deciding. She didn't answer. She said, I don't want to put your sister in the middle of this. Which is a sentence that only makes sense if somebody has already put her there. So I explained him. I hadn't done that with my mother before, not in a straight line, and I heard my own voice go flat and clinical the way it does at work. I said he stands behind me in crowds. I said he puts his weight on my feet when I lose the thread, and that it takes about 90 seconds, and that in 9 years nobody has ever had to call anybody. I said if it gets bad, I tell him out, and he walks me to a door. I said I would use the side door and nobody would even know we left. I was proud of how calm it came out. My mother let it sit. She has a way of letting a thing sit that makes you want to fill the silence with an apology, and I have been falling for it since I was 6. Then she said it, very gently, the way you'd tell somebody they had something in their teeth. He makes it about you. I didn't say anything. She kept going, warmer now, because she thought she was landing it. Honey, one day. Let it be about your sister for one day. Then she said goodbye like we'd settled on flowers. I put the phone face down on the counter. I sat on the kitchen floor with my back against the dishwasher, and Duke got up from his spot by the door and came over and laid across my feet without being asked, and I stayed there about 10 minutes. Somewhere in those 10 minutes, a thought went by that I didn't want. It was that, makes it about you is a strange phrase for a 63-year-old woman to reach for. It's not how she talks. It sounded borrowed. I pushed it away, because the other option was worse, and I wasn't ready for the other option yet. The next morning I did what I always do, which is try to solve it. I wrote her a long text and rewrote it twice to get the tone right, and I offered 3 things. 1. I'd sit at the last table by the side door with Duke tucked under and out of sight, and I would not move for the whole reception. 2. I'd skip photographs entirely, all of them, including the sister ones, and I would not be in a single frame. 3. I'd leave before they opened the dance floor, so the loud part of the night would happen without me in it. 3 doors. I built her 3 doors. She answered each one, and every answer was warm, and every answer was no. The last table was already assigned. The photographer had a schedule, and it would look strange if somebody ducked out. Leaving early would make a statement, and people would ask, and Cass would notice. I read that text 4 times standing in my driveway. Because here's what it told me. If it were about flooring, door 1 solves it. If it were about photographs, door 2 solves it. If it were about noise or allergies or the deposit, door 3 solves it. She turned down all 3, which meant the problem was not the dog's nails or Trent's mother's cat. The problem was that Duke would be in the room, visible, on a leash, wearing a vest, in front of 200 people who would then know something about me that my mother had spent 9 years keeping in the garage. She ended the message the way she ends everything. Let's not make this a thing. You only say that about something that's already a thing, and she'd been holding it a lot longer than I had. Cass called me at 11 that night. My sister is 29 and teaches 3rd grade, and she has the voice of somebody who talks for a living, except that night it was sanded down to nothing. She'd been up since 5. The caterer had lost a head count. Trent's brother had gotten a DUI in Bandera, and there was a whole thing about whether he was still an usher. She talked for 6 minutes before she got to it, and when she got to it, she got there fast. Mom told me about the dog. I said, okay. I don't care about the dog, Lena. I swear to God I don't care about the dog. Bring him, bring 6 of him. And for about 2 seconds something in my chest let go, because that's all I'd wanted anybody to say out loud since Tuesday. Then she said the next part. Can you just handle her for me? Just this once. I can't do her and the caterer and Trent's brother. Can you handle her? And I listened to myself say, yeah, immediately. No pause at all. 34 years of reflex and it fires faster than thought. I heard it come out of my mouth and I recognized it, the way you recognize your own handwriting on something you don't remember writing. My sister exhaled. She said thank you about 5 times. Then, right before she hung up, she said one more thing, quieter. And don't tell her I called. So there it was. She wasn't taking my side. She wasn't taking Mom's side either. She was doing what everybody in our family does, which is hand the heavy thing to the person who's carried heavy things before, and then leave the room. I told her I loved her. I meant it. Then I sat in the dark for a while and did the math on what I'd just agreed to. My invitation came late. That should have told me something. My mother had taken the whole box home from the stationer to check addresses, which is a real thing she has done for every family event since 2004, and I'd always thought of it as her being useful. Mine showed up on the 29th. Heavy cardstock, letterpress, my sister's handwriting on the envelope because she'd insisted on addressing them herself. Beautiful. And down at the bottom of the reply card, under the line that said adults only, there was a second line in the same font, same size, perfectly aligned, that said no animals. I read it maybe 8 times. I took a picture and sent it to Cass without any words attached, because I couldn't think of any words that wouldn't sound like an accusation. She called in 4 minutes. I could hear her walking outside. "That's not," she said, and then stopped, and then started again. "Lena, that's not the proof I signed off on. I have the proof on my phone. It says adults only, and that's all it says." Neither of us said anything for a second. Then she said the thing she was going to keep saying all month. She probably meant it kindly. I asked her one question. I asked whether Trent's cousin, the one with the beagle who posts it in a stroller, got the same card. Cass went and found out. She called me back an hour later and her voice had changed. The extra line was only on the cards that went to our side. 22 envelopes, all Sewells and Kesslers. Somebody had gone to a print shop, paid for a second run, and made sure the sentence landed only where it needed to land. He makes it about you. I stood in my kitchen holding a piece of cardstock, and I finally understood that this had been decided a long time before anybody called me. Here's what I actually wanted. I want to say it plain, because it was small, and because people always assume it was bigger. I wanted to be in the hallway photograph. Cass has a hallway in her new house in Center Point, and there's going to be a framed picture in it for the next 30 years, and I wanted to be a person in that picture. I wanted a chair at table 2. And I wanted to hug my sister at the car before she left, the way our dad hugged people, with one hand flat on the back of your head. That was the entire ambition. So I did it correctly. I called Sablewood Barn on the Monday and got the coordinator, Marisol Vega, on the second ring. I emailed her a description of Duke's 3 tasks in plain language, 1 paragraph, no attachments, no jargon. I asked for a parking spot in the rear lot near the side entrance instead of the valet line at the top of the hill. I asked to be seated within sight of an exit. Marisol answered in 2 hours. She was kind and she was professional, and she said the rear lot was no problem, and she'd flag the seating with the planner. She used the word handler. Not many people know that word. I printed her email and put it in the glove box of my truck, which is a thing I do, and I'm not going to pretend it wasn't a little bit armor. Then I hung the dress on the back of the closet door and told Duke we were going to a wedding. Everything I did that week was correct. I want you to hold on to that, because in about 72 hours I was going to find out exactly what a correct plan is worth against a woman who never breaks a single rule herself. The rehearsal dinner was Friday at my mother's house in Comfort, 22 miles from mine. She has a dining table that seats 8 and there were 11 of us, so she'd put a card table on the end, the folding kind with the metal legs, covered with a cloth that almost matched. That's where my plate was. Card table, by the kitchen door, facing the wall. My mother had a reason and she gave it before I could sit down, cheerfully, to the whole room. I put Lena down there so the dog has room. Everybody nodded. It sounded thoughtful. Duke had 18 inches under the main table and would have used 4 of them, and he lay down under the card table and put his chin on my shoe and did not move for 2 hours. Nobody looked at him. That's the part people don't understand about how this works. There's no cruelty you can point at. There's a folding table and a warm explanation and 11 people agreeing that it makes sense. My aunt asked me about work and I told her about the drive between counties, and she said I must love the independence. My cousin's husband asked if I'd thought about travel nursing. Somebody passed the rolls around the main table twice and forgot the card table both times, and my mother noticed the second time and brought me one on a saucer. Personally, with a little squeeze of my shoulder, and I said thank you. I counted something while I sat there. Out of 11 people at that dinner, I was the only one whose back was to the room. I have never in my life sat with my back to a room. Not since 2017. She'd known that about me for 9 years, and I had never once said it out loud. And that's how I knew she knew. She stood up before dessert with a glass of white wine she wasn't drinking. My mother gives good remarks. 30 years as an administrative secretary for the school district taught her how to say something with a shape to it. She talked about Cass at 9 years old refusing to come out of the pool. She talked about my dad, Gene, who died in February of 2019, and she got the room quiet in the right way, and I watched my sister's chin go, and it was genuinely lovely. Then she pivoted. Tomorrow is Cass's day, she said. One day. And all I want is a day where nothing pulls the attention somewhere else, where we all just get to look at her. A few people said, "Amen," the way people do at a table. She raised her glass. And in 90 seconds of talking about attention, my mother did not look at me one single time. Not a glance. Not the accidental sweep you make across a room. She looked at the ceiling and at Cass and at the window and at Trent's parents, and there was a shape cut out of the room where I was sitting, which meant every single person at that table looked at me instead. 11 heads, one after another, the way a wave goes down a row of dominoes. My aunt looked at her plate right after. Trent's mother smiled at me with her mouth. Cass laughed at something and looked down at her fork and stayed there. I lifted my glass with everybody else and I drank the wine I don't usually drink, and under the card table Duke shifted his weight onto my left foot because my leg had started going, and I hadn't noticed. Then the front door opened. Somebody was late, and my mother's face did something I'd only seen twice in my life. He came in with his shirt pressed and his hair wet combed and a bottle of something in a paper bag. My uncle Ray Kessler, 58, my mother's younger brother by 5 years. He drove in from Bourne where he runs a 2-bay engine shop. I hadn't seen him since Dad's funeral. My mother crossed the room and said, "Ray," the way you'd greet a delivery driver who'd rung the bell during dinner, and took the bag out of his hand and put it on the counter behind her without looking at it. Cass got up so fast she knocked her napkin off. She hugged him. She'd invited him herself, it turned out, and she hadn't asked anybody first, and the reason she gave later was simple. When our dad had his stroke in 2019, Ray drove 90 minutes and sat in a hospital hallway for 2 days. Nobody else in the family did that. Somebody found him a chair. Not at the main table. He ended up at the card table with me, which my mother arranged in about 4 seconds without appearing to arrange anything at all. Uncle Ray sat down. He looked at Duke. 1 second, maybe less, straight at the vest, at the patch, at the D-ring on the harness handle. And then he looked away, and never looked again. He didn't ask me anything. He talked about the drought. He said the pecans were bad this year and the price was worse. He asked whether I still had the Silverado, and I said, 2013, 206,000 miles, and he said, keep it. A little talk about weather and a truck. And then he let it be. That was it. He never asked me a single question about the dog, and that's exactly how I knew he already had all the answers. I drove home that night with the windows down. 30 minutes, dark 2-lane, deer on the shoulder. Duke rode in the passenger footwell because he won't use the seat. People always want the war story first. I'm going to give you the grocery store instead, because the grocery store is the part that actually explains me. August of 2021. HEB in Kerrville, a Thursday, 6 in the evening, which is a stupid time to shop, and I knew it. I was in the checkout line with a cart full of nothing important. The man behind me stood closer than people stand. Not touching, just closer. And there was a rolling cage of stock coming down the aisle behind him, and the beeping, and somebody dropped a case of water. And I went away. That's the only honest way I know to say it. 4 minutes, according to the girl at the register, who was 19 and did everything right. I came back sitting on the floor between the batteries and the phone chargers with my cart still up at the front of the line and my keys in my hand. Nobody had touched me. Nothing had happened. That's the whole horror of it. Nothing had happened, and I lost 4 minutes and my legs and a certain idea I had about myself. I got in the truck, and I sat there, and I filled out the second watch K9 application on my phone in the parking lot, all 31 pages of it, over 2 hours, with the engine off. That's the day. Not a battlefield, a checkout line. If you're listening to this while you fold laundry, do me one favor. Think about the thing you've stopped explaining to your family. The pill, the cane, the therapist, the dog. Then keep it. Tell me in the comments what yours is. I read them all. And I promise, you're not the only one. Subscribe if you want the rest of this, because tomorrow is the wedding. And the reason I ended up on that floor in 2021 is older than the grocery store. It's 4 years older. But we'll get there. Saturday, October 17th. I left my house at 2:15 for a 4:30 ceremony because 38 miles takes 55 minutes on those roads, and I wanted 90 minutes on the ground. Sablewood Barn sits in an old pecan orchard outside Comfort, a tin barn somebody spent real money on, polished concrete and string lights and 22 round tables. Marisol Vega met me in the rear lot in flats with her heels in her hand. She'd saved me a spot 40 yards from the side entrance, gravel, shaded, nose out. Then she walked me through 3 exits without me asking. Side door to the pecan yard, front doors, service door at the back of the kitchen that opens onto a gravel path. She showed me my seat, table 2, 6 steps from the side door, and she said the planner had it flagged. She asked me exactly 2 questions, the 2 she's allowed to ask, and she asked them the way somebody asks who has asked them 100 times and has been yelled at for it more than once. Is he a service animal required because of a disability? What work or task has he been trained to perform? I answered both. She wrote nothing down. She said, "Perfect. Thank you, ma'am," and moved on to the linens. I opened my clutch to get the parking tag she handed me. It's navy, it snaps. My dad bought it. Inside, under the tag and the lipstick I don't wear, there's a small enameled unit crest, about the size of a nickel, with a pinback that has never once been through fabric. I've carried it for 8 years. I have never put it on. I couldn't have told you that morning why I do either of those things. At 3:40 they tested the microphone. Tin barn, hard floor, a sound guy running feedback up and down to find the ceiling. It hit a frequency and went through the metal, and my hearing did the thing where the room gets far away and my hands stop being mine. I don't fight it anymore, because fighting it costs more. I went out the service door at the back of the kitchen and onto the gravel path. I want you to see this path, because it matters later. It's white caliche gravel, about 90 yards, running from the service door along the back of the barn to the rear lot, with pecan trees on the left side and a low concrete step at the near end where the caterers set their coolers. Afternoon light coming sideways. Nobody uses it during an event except staff. I sat down on the concrete step. Duke came around in front of me and stepped up and laid his chest and shoulders across both of my feet, all 78 pounds of him, which is not a hug and is not affection. It's pressure. It gives your nervous system something true to argue with. And I did what they teach you, which is to count what's actually touching you. I said it out loud, because out loud works better. 1. Gravel through the soles of my shoes. 2. His weight on my feet. 3. My left hand on his shoulder blade. 1, 2, 3. 90 seconds. Maybe a little less. Then my hands came back, and the barn came back, and I could hear a woman laughing about a bustle somewhere inside. When I looked up, Marisol was standing in the service door with a headset around her neck, and she had seen the whole thing. She didn't ask if I was okay. She went inside and came back out with a bottle of water, set it on the step next to me, and left without saying anything about it. Remember that gravel path? That's where they sent us later. The ceremony was fine. Better than fine. They did it outside in the pecan yard at 4:30 with the light coming through low, and I sat in the last row on the aisle with Duke down flat behind the chair legs where nobody could see him. Trent cried before Cass got halfway up. He's an electrician. He's 31. He's got hands like a bricklayer, and he cried like a kid at a dog movie, and I decided right then that I liked him. And when my sister came up the aisle, she found me. 200 people, and she turned her head and found my face, and did the thing we've done since she was 4. which is push her tongue against her front teeth to keep from laughing. 30 seconds. It was worth the drive. It was worth all of it. And I want that in the record, because what comes next is going to make it sound like the whole day was a war, and it wasn't. Afterward, out on the grass during the cocktail hour, Trent's daughter came over. Ainsley, 9 years old, tulle dress, a scab on one knee, absolutely unafraid. She crouched down about 4 feet from Duke, exactly the right distance, and she looked at his vest and read it, and then she looked at me and asked the best question anybody had asked me in 9 years. What's his job? I got as far as, he has 3. Then a hand came down on Ainsley's shoulder from behind. My mother. Smiling. Lovely. In dove gray. Sweetheart, she said. We don't bother people. And she steered her away toward the drinks table with a hand between her shoulder blades, and Ainsley looked back at me once. That was 4:50 in the afternoon. That was the first moment all day that I understood exactly how the rest of it was going to go. They did family photographs at 5:15 by the stock tank. Golden hour. The photographer running the list off a printed sheet. My mother had made the sheet. I know because I watched her hand it to him that afternoon, folded twice, and I watched him unfold it and put it on his clipboard. And at the time I thought, good. Somebody's organized. He worked through it in groups. Bride and groom with groom's parents. Bride and groom with the whole hall inside, and there were a lot of them. Then he said, okay. Immediate family. And he read the names off the sheet. Cass, Trent, Sharon, Ainsley. Then he stopped and looked at the sheet again, the way you do when the math doesn't work. And he glanced up, and he saw me standing 8 feet away in the dress I'd bought for this with a leash in my hand, and he looked back down at the paper. He didn't say anything to me. What was he going to say? He's a vendor with a shot list. He called the next group. And here's the part I've thought about more than any other thing that happened that day. Nobody made me leave. Nobody said a word to me at all. I stepped backward, off the grass and onto the caliche, on my own 2 feet, so that the photographer wouldn't have to be the man who asked me to move, and so my mother wouldn't have to be the woman who asked either. I removed myself from the picture. Cass was 30 feet away getting her train fixed by 2 women with their mouths full of pins, and she never heard any of it. That photograph hangs in her hallway now. 5 people. It's a good picture. My mother is smiling in it, and she isn't smiling at anything in particular, because there was nothing to the left of the frame. Between the photographs and the reception, there's a gap, 40 minutes, where a wedding has no idea what to do with itself. I went into the prep kitchen for a bowl of water for Duke. It's a working kitchen, steel counters, a hand sink, warmers going. My mother's purse was on the end of the counter, open, because she'd been in there fixing her lipstick and got called away about the cake table. I wasn't looking. I want to be honest about that. I was not snooping. I was standing at a sink with a stainless bowl in my hand, and it was right there, and I saw the logo. Second Watch K9. Navy blue, the same font as the vest. It was the family packet. They send one to every household a handler names on the intake form, and I put my mother's address on that form in 2021, and I mailed it thinking she'd read the first page and put it in a drawer. It was folded to a specific page, not the front. Page 11, the section for relatives, and it had been read hard. The crease was soft and furred, the way paper gets when it's been opened and closed a lot of times over several years. And one line on that page had a pencil mark under it. I know the sentence by heart now. Handlers often report family members describing the dog as attention-seeking or as making the handler's condition the focus of family events. Attention. Focus. Making it about you. She hadn't misunderstood anything. She hadn't been confused about what he was for, or scared of dogs, or worried about the flooring. She had read the page that told her exactly what a person like her says to a person like me, and she had underlined it. And then 2 years later she had said it to me on the phone in her kindest voice. He makes it about you. I put the packet back the way I found it. I set the water bowl down for Duke. I never mentioned it to a single human being, not that night, not ever, until right now. The cocktail hour ran in the pecan yard until 6:30. It was beautiful out there. That hour when Texas stops trying to kill you and starts showing off. And I stood at the edge of it with a glass of tea and did the job I always do at family events, which is answer questions for people who don't want the answers. My cousin Dana asked whether Duke was a real service dog or one of those emotional support ones. I said he's task-trained, 3 tasks, placed through a program. She said, huh? And then she told me about a woman at her office who takes a dog on the plane in a purse. Her husband asked whether I had papers for him, and I said, there's no federal registry, which is true. And he said there ought to be. And I said, a lot of people think so. And we left it there. Somebody's teenager asked if she could pet him, and I said no. And she took it fine. Then a man, I don't know, one of Trent's uncles, dropped a piece of cheese on the ground about a foot from Duke's nose. On purpose. To see. Duke looked at it. Duke looked at me. Duke did not move, and the man laughed and said, well, I'll be damned, and clapped me on the shoulder like I'd won something at a fair. I smiled. I have a smile for this. I'd been using it for 2 hours and it was starting to wear at the corners. And that's when I saw my mother over by the door to the prep kitchen, standing very close to Marisol Vega, talking with her chin down and her hand resting on Marisol's forearm. 20 seconds maybe. Marisol's face didn't move. Then my mother patted her arm twice and walked away toward the cake table, and Marisol stood there for a second longer than she needed to. They opened the barn at 6:30 and there was a seating chart on an easel by the doors, a slab of live-edge pecan with the names burned into it. Cass had made it herself over 2 weekends with a wood-burning pen, and it was genuinely beautiful. And it took me a long time to find myself on it. Table 2 is the family table. 6 chairs. I read the names: Sharon Sewell, Trent's mother and father, Trent's grandmother, Trent's Aunt Bev, who Cass had met twice, Ainsley Holland. 6 names, 6 chairs, and none of them were mine. My name was at table 11. I walked in and found it, and table 11 is against the north wall, directly under the left speaker stack, close enough that when the DJ tested a track, I felt it in my sternum from across the room. It is the farthest table in the building from the side door. Every other table in that barn was closer to an exit than mine. Uncle Ray was at table 4, out on the far edge by the cake table, with 3 relatives nobody knew where to put. I went and looked at table 2 again, just to be sure I hadn't miscounted, and that's when I noticed the thing that took the air out of me. There were 6 chairs at table, 2 in 6 place settings. Not 7, with 1 pulled. 6. Somebody had gone to the trouble of having a chair carried out of the room and the settings rebalanced so the table wouldn't look short. That's not forgetting. Forgetting leaves a gap. Whoever laid out that chart knew what a speaker stack does to me, and knew it from a page 11 she'd been reading since 2021, and they still had a chair carried out of the room. So I picked up the chair from table 11 and carried it across the barn and set it down at table 4 next to my uncle, and I sat in it. And nobody said a thing. Ray didn't ask why. He moved his water glass over to make room. The other 3 at that table were a great aunt who was 91 and 2 cousins from Amarillo who talked to each other. Duke went down under the table and put his chin on my left shoe. Ray ate his salad. Then, somewhere between the salad and the chicken, he started talking about my grandfather. I never really knew Walter Kessler. He came home in 1971 and he died in 2009, and in between he was a man who existed mostly in the garage. That's not a figure of speech. There was a recliner out there, and a shop light, and a radio, and my grandmother used to bring his plate out and bring it back in. Ray said his father sat in that garage most nights from the year he got back until the year he died. He said it flat, cutting his chicken. He said the whole family had a phrase for it, and he said it in his sister's voice, doing her exactly. We called it peace and quiet. I put my fork down. Ray said that in 2006, when he was 38 and had 2 deployments behind him, he sat down on an overturned bucket in that garage and asked his father one direct question about 1970. Just one. He said his mother never forgave him for it, and Sharon never forgave him for it either, and he'd been put at the far end of the table at every family event he'd bothered to come to since. 20 years of far tables. He shrugged. He said, I'd ask it again. Then he asked whether I wanted his role, and I said yes, and that was the end of it. And up at the front of the room, somebody was tapping a microphone. I went to get water. Not for me, for Duke, because the barn was warm and he'd been working for 4 hours. The prep kitchen door was propped with a rubber wedge and there were 2 voices behind it, and I stopped in the little hallway between the bar and the kitchen the way you stop when you hear your own name coming. Except she didn't use my name. My mother said, "It's just during the speeches. It's the dog, not her." Marisol said, "Ma'am, I can't." And my mother talked right over the top of it. Still soft, still pleasant, the same voice she uses to ask for a table by the window. "I'm not asking you to do anything," she said. "I'm asking you to say it nicely." And then, because my mother has never in her life made a threat, she said the other part. "You do the Ellison girls' wedding in March, don't you? Peggy Ellison's my dearest friend. That's how it works in a town of 2,000 people. Nobody threatens anybody. They just mention who they know at church." I stood in that hallway holding an empty glass and I did not go in. I want to be honest about why, because for a long time I told myself it was strategy. It wasn't strategy. It was 34 years of not making a scene in my mother's vicinity, and my body obeyed before my brain got a vote. I want to stop here for 1 second. If you have ever been in a house where nobody says the cruel thing out loud, where it always comes through somebody else, you already know what's coming. Tell me in the comments if you've heard that sentence. I'm not asking you to do anything. Hit subscribe, I need to finish this. At 7:50 they dimmed the string lights for the toasts. Trent's best man went first and he was bad at it in the way that's charming. Then the DJ said the maid of honor would go next, and then the mother of the bride. And while everybody was turning their chairs toward the head table, Marisol Vega came around the outside of the room and stopped at my shoulder, and she crouched down beside my chair so that her eyes were level with mine. It's a good gesture. It's what you do, so a person doesn't have to look up at you. She has clearly been trained to do it, and she was using it to do this. "I'm so sorry," she said. "Would you mind waiting outside? Just through the toasts." I asked her who was asking. She looked at me and she didn't answer, which was its own answer, and she'd known it would be. Then she said one more thing, so quietly I had to read half of it off her mouth. "For what it's worth, the ADA says I shouldn't be asking you this. I know exactly what I'm doing. I'm asking anyway." I said, "Okay." That's what I said. "Okay." I stood up, and I picked up my clutch and then set it back down on the table because my hands were full with the leash, and I walked the length of that barn to the side door with 200 people turned in their chairs. Some of them were still turning toward the head table and some of them had stopped turning. Duke walked on my left the way he always does. At my knee, not ahead. Nobody stopped me. Not one person in a building that held 200 people, half of them blood, said a single word. That's the part I would think about for a year afterward. Not what my mother did. What everybody else didn't. I went around the outside of the barn to the back, because the pecan yard had the smokers in it and I didn't want to explain myself to anyone, which put me on the gravel path. Same white caliche, same 90 yards, same concrete step by the service door, and now it was full dark, and the string lights inside were throwing yellow through the barn's high windows onto the trees. I sat down on the step, and through the tin wall I could hear the entire thing. That's the detail I'd change if I could change one. Not the Exile, the acoustics, tin carries. I heard the maid of honor's whole speech, and I heard where the laughs went, and I could tell from the shape of it when she got to the part about the pool when Cass was 9. I heard 200 people say "ah" at the same time through a metal wall. Then I heard my mother's voice start, and it was warm, and the room went quiet for her the way rooms do. Duke stepped up and put his weight across my feet. I hadn't told him to. He'd read my breathing, which is not magic. It's just that he has been doing this job for 3.5 years and I'm not that complicated. I put my left hand on his shoulder blade, gravel under my shoes, weight on my feet, hand on the dog. 1, 2, 3. I counted my 3 points of contact alone in the dark while my sister's wedding applauded on the other side of a wall, And then the service door opened behind me, and it was not Marisol. My mother came out onto the step with a champagne flute in each hand. She had come through the kitchen, which meant she'd stopped and asked somebody where I'd gone. She'd just given a toast, and she was lit up from it, and she was being generous. She held one glass out to me. I didn't take it, so she set it down on the concrete between us, and she stayed standing. "Well," she said, "that's over with." Then she made her offer. And I need you to understand that she thought she was being kind, because that's the whole thing. That's the entire story right there. She said, "Put him in the truck. 20 minutes. Come back in through the front doors," and she'd have Marisol bring a chair to table 2, and there was still the cake cutting and the dancing and the send-off. "Nobody has to know anything," she said. Everything I had wanted 3 weeks ago, handed to me on a concrete step, for the price of the one thing that keeps me upright. And then she added the sentence that finished it. She said, "I'm doing you a favor, Lena. You'll thank me when you see the pictures." I looked at my mother in the dark with the party going on behind her. 63 years old, a woman who brought a plate out to a garage her whole childhood and carried it back in, who learned that love means making sure the living room looks normal. She wasn't lying to me. She believed every word. I said, "No." That's all I said. I didn't explain it, and I have never regretted anything less. She started to say my name, and I stood up, and I did not walk toward the parking lot. I turned around and I pulled open the service door, and I walked into that kitchen with my dog on my left, past the dish pit, past 2 guys with trays who flattened against the counter to let us by, through the swinging door, and out onto the floor of my sister's wedding reception, just as the groom lowered the microphone. 200 people. It doesn't go quiet all at once. That's a movie thing. It goes quiet in rings. The 4 tables nearest the kitchen door stopped first, and then it moved outward like something dropped in water, table by table, until the only sounds left in that building were the ice machine and a baby at table 9. The DJ, God bless him, faded the music down instead of cutting it, which is somehow worse. I stood about 15 feet onto the floor and I stopped. I hadn't planned past the door. I want to be truthful about that. There was no plan. I just knew I was not going to spend my sister's wedding sitting in the dark behind a building. So I stood there in a navy dress with a leash in my right hand and Duke sitting on my left, and I did not say anything, and I did not apologize to anybody. And that was the loudest thing I have ever done. Cass stood halfway up out of her chair at the sweetheart table. Trent put a hand on her arm, not to stop her, just to be there. She sat back down. My mother came in behind me through the side door quick and got about 4 steps onto the floor and then stopped at the edge of the dance floor where the concrete changes color, because to come any further would have been to arrive somewhere in front of everybody. Somebody at table 7 set a glass down too hard, and out at table 4, on the far edge of the room, a chair pushed back across the concrete. My Uncle Ray stood up at table 4. He didn't have a microphone and he didn't come toward the front. He just stood where he was, at the far edge of the room by the cake table, a 58-year-old man in a pressed shirt with his napkin still in his hand, and he looked at my dog. Not at me, at the vest. I watched him read it across 40 feet of barn. Second watch K9, working dog. And I watched something go across his face that I recognized from work. The look a person gets when a chart confirms what they already suspected and they were hoping to be wrong. Then his eyes went down to the tablecloth 2 feet in front of him, where my navy clutch was still sitting open where I'd set it down when my hands got full with the leash. The enameled crest was face up under the string lights, the size of a nickel. 30 years of his life in a shape most people in that room would have taken for costume jewelry. He looked at it for about 2 seconds. 30 years in the army teaches you to read 2 pieces of cloth and metal in a room and know a person's whole file. Then Ray Kessler spoke, and he did not raise his voice, because a man who spent 3 decades giving orders in loud places never has to. "I've got one question," he said. "Then I'll sit down." The barn did not make a sound. "Who in this room told her to wait outside?" And he sat down. Nobody answered. I have been in rooms where people were dying, and I have never heard a silence like the one in that barn. You could hear the walk-in compressor kick on in the kitchen. You could hear the baby at table 9 and somebody's chair creak. And out past the doors, a truck going by on the farm road. And that was all. 4 seconds. I counted them, because counting is what I do. And in those 4 seconds, 200 faces turned and found me, because I was the only person standing, and I was the only person in that building who could answer the question, and every single one of them knew it. Here is what I understood in that space. A name would end it. One name, said out loud in a level voice, and I would win everything I had come there wanting and 9 years of things I hadn't. They would believe me. They would be ashamed. Somebody would carry a chair back to table 2, and somebody else would take a picture of me at it. I could see the whole thing laid out like an instrument tray, and I understood the other part at the same time, which is that using a room full of people to destroy somebody is not a thing I learned in the army or in nursing school. I learned it at a dinner table. It is my mother's move. It is the only move she has, and she had used it on me twice that day, and she was standing 11 feet away with her hand on the back of an empty chair, waiting to find out if I was going to be her daughter about it. So I answered the only part of that question that belonged to me. I talk the way I talk when I'm reading a discharge instruction to somebody's husband. Flat, slow, no color. I said his name is Duke, and he's 5 years old and he does 3 things. I said, he stands behind me in crowds so nobody can come up on my back. I said, he puts his weight across my feet when I lose the thread, and I count 3 points of contact until my hands come back. I said, and when I tell him out, he finds the nearest door and he takes me to it. Then I told them the rest, because they'd earned the question even if they hadn't asked it. I said in March of 2017 I was 25 years old and I was an Army medic, and on one afternoon that spring I worked for about 40 minutes with a perforated eardrum and a broken wrist, and I said a 19-year-old's first name out loud in that barn, and I did not say what happened to him, because that belongs to his mother and not to a wedding. I said, 4 years after that I couldn't stand in a checkout line at the HEB in Kerrville. I said, I sat down on the floor by the batteries and I didn't come back for 4 minutes, and nothing had happened. That's the part. Nothing had happened. And then I said the thing I'd wanted to say for 9 years to people who had opinions about my dog. That's what happened the day I earned him. There's no medal in this story. There's a dog, and there's a checkout line. And this is what it takes for me to be in a room with all of you. Out at table 4, my uncle stood up again. He asked it a second time, quieter, and he asked it looking straight at me. And who told you to wait outside? Everybody in that building knew. Half of them were related to her. The other half had watched her hand a folded sheet of paper to a photographer at 5:15, and watched a woman crouch by my chair at 7:50, and not one of them had said anything. And now they wanted me to say it, so they wouldn't have to. I looked at my uncle. I said, that's not my question to answer. Then I turned around and looked at my mother, and I did not look at anybody else, and I kept my voice down low enough that it was meant for her. It didn't matter. That barn was so quiet that the far tables heard every word, and I knew they would, and I said it anyway, because it was hers. You told me he makes it about me. She had her hand on the chair back. He makes it about me so that you never have to. Her mouth opened and nothing came out of it. I have watched my mother handle a funeral, a foreclosure notice, and a school board meeting, and I have never once seen her without the next sentence ready. Then I said the last thing, and I said it once, in the flat voice. The way you say a thing you are not going to explain again for the rest of your life. I'll keep coming to things. The dog stays on my left. That's the whole sentence. And that was the moment I lost the wedding, and I knew it while I was doing it. Because I turned to my sister in her dress at the sweetheart table with her mascara gone, and I told her I was sorry, and that I wasn't going to stay for the cake. No hallway photograph, no dance, no hug at the car with my hand flat on the back of her head like our father used to do. 29 years of being her big sister, and I was going to miss the 90 seconds she'd remember longest, and I chose it, standing there, on purpose. Cass said, Lena. I said, it's okay. Go be married. Then I put my hand down on Duke's shoulder blade and I said, "Out." And my dog stood up and took me to the nearest door. I heard the first chair when I was about halfway to the side door, then 4 or 5 more, and then it was a sound like a barn roof in hail, 200 people getting up off folding chairs on a concrete floor. I did not turn around and I did not walk any faster. Duke took me out the side door and across the pecan yard and onto the caliche, and the applause started when I was already outside, and through a tin wall it sounds exactly like rain. It went on for a while. Then it stopped, and I heard the sound of 200 people sitting back down, and I kept walking to the rear lot with my shoes in my hand. Marisol came out 10 minutes later while I was standing at the tailgate of my truck giving Duke water out of a takeout container. She told me what I hadn't turned around to see. My mother had gotten up from the edge of the dance floor to head me off at the doors, and she was already standing when the room stood. So she was standing in the middle of all of it, facing the wrong way, in dove gray. And when the applause ended and 200 people sat down, she was the only one left on her feet. Nobody stood with her, and nobody sat with her, and she had no idea what to do with her hands. Marisol said she stayed like that for a good 5 seconds. Then Marisol apologized on behalf of Sablewood Barn. She said the owner would be calling. She said, "I should have said no in that kitchen." And I told her the truth, which is that I hadn't said anything in that kitchen either. The venue refunded $1,200 of the $6,500 deposit and changed a policy. Staff at Sablewood no longer take instructions about a guest from anybody whose name isn't on the contract. Marisol still works there. She emailed me the new language and asked if it was any good, and I told her it was, and I meant it. That's the whole legal aftermath. There was no lawsuit. I never asked for one, and nobody offered. My mother did not change. I want to be clear about that, because I know how these stories usually go and mine doesn't go that way. She has never apologized. She tells a version where I chose that night to make a point, and where the dog was a decision I made and not a prescription I filled, and at least 4 people in our family believe her, including one I would have bet money on. I was not invited to Thanksgiving. I was not invited to Christmas. My cousin Dana unfollowed me, and then followed me again in February, which I assume is a whole internal journey I'll never hear about. In January I came out of the pharmacy in comfort, and my mother was 2 spaces over, loading a bag into her trunk. She looked at Duke a long time. Then she said the only thing she has ever said to me about any of it. Nobody helped him either. Her father, she meant. The garage, the recliner, the shop light, 30 years. She didn't say it like an apology, and she didn't say it like an argument. She said it like a fact she'd been carrying since 1971 and had finally found somewhere to set down. Then she got in her car and drove to church. And she still has not asked me to Sunday dinner. Here's what did change. Cass calls every week now instead of every month. And the first time she called after the wedding, she cried for a long time and then said, "The dog stays on your left. I've got it." In the middle of March, 5 months out, she and Trent had a housewarming at their place outside Center Point, and my sister made a seating plan for a backyard cookout. Which is the most Sewell thing that has ever happened, and my name and Duke's were the first 2 on it, and she did not ask a single person's opinion before she wrote them down. The wedding photograph hangs in her hallway. 5 people. She hung it, because it's a good picture of her husband and because she is not going to pretend a day didn't happen. But she hung another frame beside it. Same size, and that one is 4 of us in the backyard on a card table afternoon, and there's a yellow dog lying across my feet in it. And Ainsley, who is 10 now and has a permanent scab on the same knee, came and crouched down that afternoon at exactly the right distance and asked me the question again. What's his job? I told her all 3. I told her the whole thing, in a regular voice, at a regular volume, at a family event, with people standing around us eating brisket. Nobody put a hand on her shoulder. Nobody steered her away. She said, "That's cool," and asked if she could watch him work, and I said yes. I figured out something on that gravel path, walking to my truck with my shoes in my hand. For 9 years I had been doing for my family the exact job Duke does for me, standing behind them, taking the weight, finding the door. Except that Duke got 2 years of training and a health check every spring, and a program that calls once a year to ask whether he's still able to work. And in 9 years, not one person ever asked me that question. That's it. That's the whole thing I learned. And it took a wedding and a tin wall to learn it. I don't ask for room anymore. I don't audition. I say the one sentence, and I let people get used to it. And most of them do. And the ones who don't were never going to. The dog stays on my left. That's my story. One phone call, one gravel path, one question my uncle asked out loud when nobody else would. If somebody in your life keeps asking you to leave the thing that holds you up at home, don't. Say your one sentence and let them get used to it. If this helped, send it to the person you were thinking about the whole time. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.